Greeting Mrs. Thatcher as soon as she stepped out of her helicopter were shouts of protest from residents of the village of Fulbeck. They gathered to show the Prime Minister how angry and dismayed they are at the prospect of nuclear waste being dumped there. The Prime Minister went over to listen.
You're not listening to us, and you know damn well you're not listening. That's why you chose a seat with 18,500 majority, because you thought we'd say nothing.
Don't shout at the lady.
Then it was back to the schedule, as Mrs. Thatcher opened a new wing of the school, part of which has been named after her father, a former chairman of the Governors, to whom she paid glowing tribute.
It was from him that I learned to take an interest in the national and international affairs of our time.
We assure them that even if waste was ever buried at Fulbeck, it would be very low level. But as she flew off, she'd done little to ease
this month. Local people there who bitterly opposed the plan have started a 24-hour watch on the site. This week they had their first confrontation with Nirex workers, attempting to carry out preliminary research. Peter Pitt reports.
Villagers opposed to the dumping of nuclear waste at Fulbeck airfield erected barricades at the main entrance and began a round-the-clock vigil a month ago. Inside a caravan opposite the entrance, they kept radio contact with hundreds of protesters ready to rush to the site the moment Nirex agents appeared.
Caravan to home base, do you copy?
Yes, it's home base, I copy you.
This week, the system was used for the first time when Nirex tried to send 2 teams into the site.
Monday, it was the sound engineers who wished to do a background recording levels for when the operations start. And today, the flora and fauna people tried to get onto the airfield. Whilst we're not opposed to flora and fauna being safeguarded and protected, we are very suspicious of the reasons of why Nirex would want this evaluated prior to them coming onto the site.
What did you have to say to them when they came here?
We suggested that at the moment we were not cooperating at all with Nirex or its agents, and they'd had an early lunch. We suggested that they call it a day and go home.
What was their response?
Resistance at first, but I think when they saw our determination, they did agree to go home.
But the team of environmentalists from a London engineering consultancy firm, Creamer and Warner, had not gone home. Their blue Volvo was spotted hours later touring around the Fulbeck site looking for another way in. They were unsuccessful. The protesters had already blocked every other road onto the airfield with tyres and concrete blocks. The Nirex team, who hadn't been prepared for the reception they received, made one more attempt to get in at the only entrance. They tried to convince the protesters that their environmental impact assessment was a harmless venture, but eventually they had to accept defeat.
Norfolk through Lincoln, so you're leaving this area completely now, are you? Rightio then. No, I'm sure you will. We'll be here all the time. Bye.
Bye.
So this time, triumph for the protesters, but for how long?
As long as is necessary. We're very determined to succeed.
So what's your message to Nirex now?
Well, impolitely we could say naff off Nirex. Sensibly we'd have to say, Nirex, you've chosen the wrong site and the wrong method throughout the country. Rethink, go back to the drawing board.
But Nirex show no sign of doing that. They said today they plan to start test drilling at both proposed sites in the region, South Killingham on Humberside and here at Fulbeck later this month. They'll announce the exact date next week. The protesters, who claim a membership of over 2,000, say they'll be out in force to meet them.
Fully strong. Andy Blow reports. To face demonstrations at all 4 possible dumping sites around the country. At Fulbeck, villagers have been manning the entrance to the site for weeks, with a CB system at the ready to call in reinforcements. But the Nuclear Waste Agency has apparently chosen not to outflank the villagers by entering the site secretly at night. Instead, they've said publicly today that their contractors, the Environmental Investigation Group from Hayes in Middlesex, will arrive to start work next Monday.
We certainly expect people in the area to protest about our arrival on site. The actions taken by our contractors will depend very much upon what happens at the time. Our contractors will use every reasonable means to get on site on that day. We've obviously notified the police that date we will be arriving at the site, and we would expect their presence, but they are by no means with us at that stage. They are simply there because it is a public order situation.
The contractors will be faced by the protest group Land, who are calling on all of their 2,500 members to be present. Trevor Cartwright is the official spokesman for the group.
Completely surprised. Our information suggested that it would have been a secret and indeed clandestine entry onto the airfield. If you'll forgive our reservation, we're not even certain what the Monday the 18th means, whether or not they'll have moved equipment in before that date or whether they intend to come on that day. We don't know for certain as yet. I think we will have to increase the numbers of people who are watching at present. So our precise instructions will be no one breaks the law, no one becomes violent. We will exhaust every legal method and every non-violent method. We don't see ourselves crossing into violence and illegality.
The work at Fullbeck Aerodrome and the other 3 sites is expected to last about 7 months. Then there'll be a similar period for analysis and assessment of the results before one of the sites is selected and a planning application prepared. The Secretary of State for the Environment has already indicated that the application will be heard at a public inquiry.
Those sentiments are echoed at Fullbeck in Lincolnshire, another site pinpointed by the Nirex company, and where protesters are in 24-hour radio contact in a bid to prevent contractors getting into the area.
10-10.
We're non-violent, we must stress that. So in that sense, you know, violent actions are certainly not going to be involved. But we are determined they are not going to become on this airfield for whatever reason.
Bearing in mind the threat of possible militant action, are you likely to be taking any extra security measures because of this?
No, we have no special powers within Nirex any more than the protest groups. We are only able to attempt as ordinary citizens to gain access to the site.
The protesters in both areas say that won't happen, even if it means going to prison to keep Nirex from carrying out their tests.
Against a dumping sited at Fullbeck were also claiming victory. Here's Robert Hall.
Protesters had been arriving at Fullbeck since first light today, joining the small group who've been keeping a round-the-clock watch here for 3 weeks. Organisers had stressed this would be a peaceful protest. It was also something of a family occasion, but the resolve to prevent engineers entering the site was plain.
1 or 2 of them are quite prepared to go to jail. I'm quite convinced of that. That they completely and implicitly believe that what they're saying and what they're fighting for is right.
Exactly on time, the convoy arrived and soon found itself in head-on confrontation with the crowd, now swollen to almost 300.
May I please therefore repeat the request that you move aside and allow us to enter the site?
No, we ask you as scientists to remember your...
Back to the gate!
The engineers will return here in 2 hours' time. If access is still blocked, the next step is likely to be a court order.
3 prospective sites: Fullbeck in Lincolnshire, Killingholme on Humberside and Elstow in Bedfordshire. But the contractors say they'll be back.
At Fullbeck in Lincolnshire, local people were angry, ready and waiting for the contractors. There's strong opposition here to waste dumping. The convoy came down the road to be met by what amounted to a human wall of protesters, and a public argument began.
We fully appreciate...
I don't think you did.
I don't think
if you did,
we don't
understand the situation.
The concerns, the
You
very
go.
genuine concerns of the local people.
Why did you take the contract then?
To cheers of triumph, the drilling team drove off, vowing to return at 3 o'clock.
On what used to be a quiet country lane, the people of Lincolnshire had prepared their defences. Lookouts were posted on all roads into the area. Despite their dedication to stopping Nirex, protesters promised a peaceful day, and the atmosphere was more like a village fete than a confrontation. From inside the 500-acre site, police from the owners, the Ministry of Defence, looked on. Outside, there were ample contingents of the Lincolnshire Constabulary. Nobody doubted the strength of feeling over the issue.
Until they can prove that it's absolutely safe, I don't want the risk to my children of radioactivity.
And you think that there would be that risk?
They've never built anything that hasn't leaked.
When my grandchildren and great-grandchildren come forward, if anything does happen, then they will be able to say, well, Grandad did make a protest.
Right on time, the convoy of contractors' vehicles arrived to try to start testing the suitability of the ground here. They knew it wouldn't be that easy, and they were met by a human wall of defiance.
We ask you to go away. We shall not go away until you give up here. Thank you.
You can see how many people are here today and how strongly people feel about this. So I'd ask you just to leave, please.
We fully appreciate...
I don't think you do.
I don't think
I don't think you do.
You
don't understand the
appreciate
situation.
the concerns, the
You
very
don't.
genuine concerns of the local people.
If you why did you take the contract?
And we acknowledge
Why did you take the
your
contract?
right.
Then, to general celebration, the vehicles withdrew, and it was round one to the protesters. The first wave had been repulsed, but the contractors said they'd be back, and exactly 4 hours later, they met with exactly the same reception. Once again, they were prevented from starting the job. They didn't say when they'd try again.
It remained peaceful, however, and local points of view were aired. Not all of them as abrupt as the banners would suggest.
Just basically for, you know, future generations, and I'm totally opposed to them dumping nuclear waste anywhere near people, and I think there's far safer places to dump the waste.
Well, it seems to me absolutely lunatic to shift millions of tons of radioactive waste from a nuclear polluted environment, take it hundreds of miles across country and bury it in the middle of a unpolluted agricultural environment.
To everyone's delight, the convoy beat a retreat here too. The ball would now appear to be in the court of the contractors and Nirex as to whether or not they go to law to gain access to the sites.